One of the most surprising things to happen in movies over the last decade has got to be Bob Odenkirk deciding to gear up and taking over for Liam Neeson by doing these mid-budget action films every couple of years. But you're not going to hear me complaining about that one bit. No, sir, because he's actually pretty good at it. Normal is the latest action movie starring Bob Odenkirk, directed by Ben Wheatley, and it tells the story of interim Sheriff Ulysses, who's called to the snowbound town of Normal, Minnesota, and uncovers an international criminal conspiracy when he comes to the aid of a bank robbing couple caught up in a deadly mess. I feel like I'd be lying if I said I wasn't addicted to these types of unlikely heroes thrust into a position of action type of movies that we've been getting lately, but this film definitely fits the mold with that kind of story in mind. But there's a little bit of an extra added flavor here with Bob Odenkirk being at the helm of this story. It kind of turns it into a dad movie because you have this old guy that wants to show that he's still got a little bit of gas left in the tank, and he's put into a position to kind of prove whether that's true or not. And clocking in at a runtime of a quick 90 minutes, there's just enough time here to give you an interesting sliver of a backstory for this character, some pulse-pounding action along the way, a few laughs here and there, and a satisfying enough payoff at the end of this whole thing that even if you're not really going to remember the details of Normal 1 or 2 weeks after you watch it, I still think there's enough entertainment here to provide a good experience at the movies. If you ever wanted to know what it would look like if Hot Fuzz was thrown into a blender with the Fargo TV series and had a healthy dose of Henry Winkler added for good measure, this is probably the film for you, I guess. When it comes to the story they decided to go with here, on the surface, it kind of just looks like another generic and run-of-the-mill small-town action film where there's this weird conspiracy going on that you're not really able to discover until it gets later into the plot and you see how the story unfurls. But I think they took enough of a risk within the details of that formula to still entertain you, even if you're like a genre veteran and have seen every movie under the sun that kind of follows this generic premise. Now, is the conspiracy they decided to base this entire story around overly ridiculous, and it's just implemented into this entire thing to give the action some more style points and to bring the narrative into some crazy places? I mean, yeah, obviously. But this 90-minute movie's goal is to do nothing more than to entertain me, and this decision made that more possible, so your boy is just here rolling with the punches, baby. Another thing I'll say about this script is it does a decent enough job of making this snowy little town feel lived in. It zeroes in on some of the townsfolk that are milling about. There are some corny jokes in here that land, but even when they don't land, it's done in enough of a heartfelt manner that makes this experience feel a bit more wholesome. It's got to be the most wholesome R-rated action movie that I've seen in a long time, because wholesomeness isn't really a trait that accompanies these types of action films more often than not. Now, is there anything in here that's going to truly impress you past your wildest dreams and make you think you're witnessing peak cinema in real time? Probably not, but it gets enough right in this department that you're still able to have some fun with it. When it comes to the performances in this movie, Bob Odenkirk is obviously the massive draw here as our lead character, and he's done a lot of work in some films over the last few years that have just made him seem like one of the most likable guys in all of Hollywood, and that really comes through the screen, and you just want to see his characters be victorious at the ends of their journeys. Maybe he was a bit of a slime ball in Breaking Bad as Saul Goodman, but I didn't care. I was still rooting for the guy. Argue with the wall if that was wrong of me. And he continues his streak of being consistent as ever in this new movie Normal as well, playing the interim sheriff of this snowy small town where he's just trying to make it through the week with the fewest amount of problems possible, but he definitely does what's expected of him given the material at hand here. Outside of his lead performance, there's not really all that much to write home about, outside of maybe a small bit role with Henry Winkler, who's obviously just a delight to see in any cast. But Bob Odenkirk will go on to team up with a couple of different pairings over the course of this story, and they don't really bring too much to the table outside of just having this fun dynamic with our lead character. He really is the one that puts all the weight on his back and carries this story from A to B. As if it wasn't completely obvious already, I'll just go out and say that even though it took him a while to get to this point in his career, and it's probably not what he envisioned himself doing at this point in his life, I will take as many of these Bob Odenkirk-led action films as they want to give me. I mean, just him being involved creates a positive experience no matter what the plot is. When it comes to some of the action sequences involved in this movie, Ben Wheatley is the guy sitting in the director's chair this time around. Not the biggest fan of some of his more recent efforts in Hollywood like High Rise and Meg 2 The Trench, but he definitely still has some action skills at his disposal. They're on display in his more previous work, but all also on display again in Normal here. You know, it's just got to be like riding a bike. Once he got signed on to a project that was ready for him to flex that muscle again, I knew we were going to see something semi-decent out of him. And keeping in mind that the writer of this film, Derek Kolstad, also wrote the first 3 John Wick movies, and both of those Nobody films also with Bob Odenkirk, you knew that our character was going to be put into some positions to get some high-level action thrown his way. Now, is everything handled in here as well as it could have been if someone like Chad Stahelski was behind the camera for this project? No, definitely not. That's a massively tall order. But there's still enough cool action sequences in here to satisfy a fan of the genre. The bank robbery scene and the dinner scene in particular are shot really well. There's some cool choreography, a little bit of humor sprinkled in there too. They'll give you what you're looking for and will justify seeing this movie up on the big screen, even if it is still a fleeting experience. Overall, guys, Normal is a perfectly enjoyable little action movie with Bob Odenkirk that feels like a throwback to projects we used to get all the time in the mid-2000s. It's got a fast 90-minute runtime, you quickly get attached to our main character, and it leaves you satisfied even if it ends up being just a one-time watch. I don't think it does anything new to the point that it'll become a beloved entry in the genre or anything like that, but it's entertaining, you'll have a few laughs along the way, and sometimes that's all these movies are really trying to accomplish. Normal gets a Sully score of 3 stars. So that's my review of the latest action movie. What's your favorite recent entry in the genre that features an unlikely hero? I gotta go with The Accountant with Ben Affleck, always giving my Bostonian some credit there, but let me know in the comments below what you think. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys at the next one.